an AJAX call. So you've done an asynchronous call for data. These people were publishing a table with people's data using an AJAX call. So one of the things I always do is look at the AJAX call it manually, manipulate the AJAX call, see what I can make it do, all that stuff, right? It turned out that the call they were making to publish this table of data actually called for the password even though it didn't display it. So it called for it, but it just kind of threw it to the side. The problem was it was a clear text password. It wasn't MD5, it wasn't SHA-1, it wasn't SHA-256 plus a hash. It was 100% clear text straight out of the database.
Can we make a quick point that MD5, SHA-256, 512, whatever is all broken?
Yeah, we're going to get there, don't worry. So another one, property insurance. Again, a really good website, worked out really well. There was a way, because when we do web apps, not pen tests, we usually have authenticated and unauthenticated attacks, because things that an attacker can do as an authenticated user are also important. Because if I fish your credentials and I can get in with a low privilege level, I might be able to escalate privilege, right? So it turned out that in that case, again, really good site, SQL injection protection, cross-site scripting, all that kind of stuff. The download mechanism to download PDFs for mortgage documents, or for insurance documents rather, was completely unprotected. And you could basically try to log in, it would fail, and as soon as you tried to log in and fail, it set a session value for you, and then you could download anything you wanted. You didn't log in, you failed, but it still let you download anything you wanted now, because it had like a session variable that it didn't set the right way, and basically usurped the entire authentication mechanism for authorization. Property sales, another thing, mortgage documents in this case, you could download any PDF, and this was similar to the first one, except in this case, all the PDFs were incremented with starting at 1,000, and as an unauthenticated user with wget, you could just wget blah.pdf 1, 2, 3, 5,000, and they had social security numbers, they actually had finance details, all that kind of stuff. Last one, this was actually a zero-day vulnerability I found. So there's a WordPress plugin. Zero-day just means it's not basically not known, not patched, not whatever. Pick your definition. So there was a WordPress plugin that sucked. It had 60,000 downloads when I found out it had a vulnerability in it. So clearly there's not going to be 60,000 web servers out there that's vulnerable, but there's probably going to be a nice few out there. So once I found the vulnerability, then I was able to get the password hashes from WordPress, their MD5, rainbow table, which basically takes a hash, computes, sets what the hash is, and then stores that value. You never have to compute it again. It's already done. The hard part about anything is you have to compute these values and hope they're the right one. And in the case of rainbow table, you have a lookup. You basically just search for what value you want to match to, and you get the password. So had the password, logged into the intranet site with that password for the user, because of course they reused the password and they didn't have two-factor, right? Once you have file system access, one thing people don't realize about SQL injection is not just bad because of you can do SQL queries. You can write data and read data from the file system with SQL if you didn't set the privileges tight enough. So once I have access to SQL on a web server, more than not, I can write data to the server and make a backdoor web shell now. And then what you can do once you have a web shell is basically anything else you want. In my case, once you're past that web server, the idea that firewalls are good is a real idea. The problem is once you've breached one server behind a firewall, as long as there's no other firewalls or VLANs or anything else after that, you basically are on the network as if you were on the network normally. There's no difference for me as an attacker. So by a SQL injection vulnerability, I am now on your intranet for all of your other servers, and now I can attack those as if I was on site at your office right now. So minus the physical access to the computer to pulling hard drive and stuff. But huge problem, obviously. So getting back to our friend's point, so crypto, there are like 12 people in the world that should ever write a crypto algorithm. The AES competition, so the Advanced Hashing Standard, AHS, that competition just finished up. AHS was basically the goal to replace the SHA series of hashes. Those competitions take like a decade apiece. So when you get AES is actually a cipher called Randall, however you want to pronounce it. So you're not like, it's not like the government is like making up a standard. They're having peer review, academically based, hugely lengthy competitions to decide which ciphers we should use for federal information processing, FIPS, as the docs are known, and other things. So we all use those ciphers. the important part isn't necessarily using them, but not using the one that your buddy made. That's where things go badly. Now, there are ciphers that you shouldn't use still, older ones or things that have been broken or found cryptographically insecure. But if you're using things like AES for symmetric key encryption, you're okay. Don't create your own database abstraction libraries. I see this more and more often, where people want to make things easier for their database. I guarantee you, for whatever language you write in, there's already someone that has had a 5, 10, 15-year project to manage a database abstraction library. So if you want to connect to MySQL or to PostgreSQL or to SQLite, you can do it through one interface, not write your own SQL abstraction library, and it's probably been peer-reviewed 1,000 times more than you'll ever get your little project peer-reviewed. There is a lot of value in having open source code, and this is a great conference to say that, right? You have people constantly looking at these things like me. Those 14 vulnerabilities I released in open source projects were 14 vulnerabilities that previously were unknown. But the software was deployed thousands, hundreds of thousands of times, right? So having an extra pair of eyes is never a bad thing, as long as the pair of eyes tells you there's a bad thing. That's the tricky part, right? So clear text passwords, unsalted, you should never use. That's very clear. To his point, so more new hotness type ideas. If you are doing like the SHA-256 and assault, that's great. There's this idea called key stretching. And basically, you take this idea of a cryptographic hash. The point of a cryptographic hash is to be as fast as possible. It's not supposed to be slow. It's not supposed to be unbreakable in the way you guys might think unbreakable and cryptographic goes together. Cryptographic hashes are trying to do a very specific niche. It's not password storage. That's not the niche cryptographic hashes were created for. S-crypt, B-crypt, these kinds of other things adjacent. Basically, you're going to add rounds of hashing. The salts are going to be treated differently. What's important and what I think is most, I guess, novel about this approach and what you guys should take away is that the amount of work effort it takes to brute force, or crack, if you will, a hash using something other than just I have SHA-256 plus a hash, or a salt. The work factor of that doesn't change. The work factor for things like what you see on the screen, it actually slows down. It makes things slower to brute force. And we're talking on the order of like milliseconds. But on orders of magnitude, if you're trying to brute force something and it's going to take 11 billion iterations, and you've added a millisecond, and it takes 1 millisecond to do it, now you've doubled the time to do that, right? So for the end user experience, you're not slowing down, like your users aren't going to log in and wait for a half hour to log in. It's still going to be, like to any human, no big deal. But the important part is you're slowing it down for the computer. You're making it hard for a computer to do the math at a rate that's going to actually be breakable in our lifetime or the millennia or the universe, or go as far as you like. So last couple points, since we're almost out of time. AJAX is one area that I'm seeing more and more often done wrong because a lot of people are doing these API calls and other things, grabbing data, pulling it down, grabbing data, pulling it down, but they're never checking to see, oh, are my admin API calls actually protected? Are my admin API calls giving more data, like the clear text passwords we were talking about? So when you're doing development and you're calling out to an API, call out to the API manually and then start screwing with everything and see if you can get any results you're not expecting. It's a really quick way just to give a little bit of efficacy to this process, because right now you're probably making some assumptions that the data you're calling down, you know it works. You know it's doing what you need it to do, but just like the smoke and mirrors slide, we need to know more than it just does what it does. We need to know, is it doing more than it should? Could it do more than it should? So some other resources, and I'm going to get out of here. OWASP, there's some information about that. OWASP Detroit, come meet with us, hang out in Royal Oak every quarter, talk about web app security. If you do Rails security, Brakeman will basically do static code analysis for your Rails app. You can't see down there slightly farther, but RIPS is basically the same thing for PHP. If you have a PHP project, run RIPS on it, open source project, maybe you'll catch something, right? Worst case scenario, you run it on this code base once, maybe you'll catch something, maybe you'll learn something that you didn't know before. So this site has my slide deck if you missed anything or you couldn't see part of the slides. All my other slide decks are linked off there as well. I've got like 5 seconds for a question. Anyone have a question? I haven't seen for 2 hours, I'm going to die here. Yes?
What do you think about claims-based authentication is becoming popular with .NET 4.5, ASP?
I'm not much of a .NET guy, so I really can't speak to that too much. The authentication mechanism, what's the side for?
I don't know how much has changed exactly. It's more focused, I think, on SAML token passing and single sign-on stuff, but it's also on the authorization side more complex than just role-based authorization.
Yeah, SAML means more now that you say it like that. Yeah, so I think the important part of the authentication is two-factor is cheap and easy, and crypto is cheap and easy. We just talked about how easy it is to brute force cryptographic hashes. SSL, there's no reason for any of you guys not to be using SSL. All right, we have the bandwidth, we have the computing power, we can use SSL. If you have a website that takes any important data in, just use SSL. I don't care if it's broken, I don't care if Oxymoron Spike told you you're gonna get owned. The important part is you have to do more than you're doing if you're not doing enough to start. If you're already using SSL and you're doing salted hashes, use Decrypt or something, right? If you're doing single authentication and it's like you have like 20 character password requirements, add two-factor. Add, whether it's using SAML, if you're using Kerberos, I don't care what you're doing, just add another factor. There are a lot of cool ways, whether it's a mobile phone, YubiKeys, anyone seen YubiKeys before? They're super sweet. They have Nano one that plug into your USB port and they're basically flush with your computer. When you touch it, it puts in the one-time pass token basically, and that'll authenticate you. So now, of course, if someone breaks into your office, you have other problems. But importantly enough, there are ways to do these things better. Twitter got a wake-up call very brutally this week with the AP, because of course people have been getting breached left and right on Twitter forever. The AP about Obama getting blown up is kind of that line in the sand for any organization, I think, where you're going to want to stop that kind of stuff. So people are working on it. I'm working on it with my clients all the time. We're making things better. But again, educators, managers, developers, you guys all have a role to do your part. Contact me if you have questions. I'm always happy to help talk to your organization, talk to you for free, pro bono, whatever you want to call it. I'm interested in facilitating the conversation to get these things solved so that my data isn't out there. Because I can't protect all the sites. I can't breach them for work. I need everyone to help me protect my information, my wife's info, my mom's info. She actually had identity theft 2 months ago. She's a retiree. It's like, come on, we've got to do better. So thanks for coming. If you guys have been here for 2 hours, thank you so much for staying. Sorry about the slides, and have a great weekend.